It's like just get started and do something that moves you forward.
Yeah.
And get the ball rolling. You don't, if you wait until the full plan's in place, you're not going to get done, but just get moving.
Yeah.
And then, I remember having a conversation with a woman about who she wanted to start her own business. And I said, just do something in the next 72 hours.
Hmm.
Whatever, start writing your business plan, go out and get a domain name, but just do one thing.
Right.
And then when that's done, do one more thing.
Right. Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Helping People Perform, where I'm talking to some amazing guests about how their chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. Delighted to be joined today all the way from the San Francisco Bay Area over in the States. We have with us today executive coach, author, speaker, ultra endurance athlete, and founder and principal consultant at Summiting Group. Welcome to the show today, Bryan Gillette. Welcome.
Thanks, Paul. It's a pleasure to be on your show and look forward to talking a little bit more.
Fantastic. I'm sure it's going to be a great one. And I've heard some of your story previously on other podcasts. And I've also read up on some of the bits that you've done and some of your books and all the rest of it that's out there. There's some amazing stories in there and some amazing things that people can take away, which I think is a critical part of this podcast sharing platform, is to allow people to go away with something that they can implement as well. So before we get kicked off in terms of who you help and how you help them, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself? Who are you and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I appreciate you being on the show. Kind of who I am. You hit some of the key points. So I am just recently about a year ago, put out a book called Epic Performance. We'll dig into that one a little bit more. I speak in front of groups. I'm an executive coach. From the business side, I really focus on two things, Paul. One is working one-on-one with leaders, directors, vice presidents, and helping them. They've been successful in their career, and helping them maybe polish in a certain areas, or kind of help them rise a little bit up, a little bit higher, to be a little bit better in what they do. So it's working one-on-one. And then a lot of what I do is also work in groups. So you've got a group of leaders that are coming together. They're trying to get aligned. Maybe they're not necessarily aligned.
Yeah.
And working with them to get them moving in the same direction, thinking about where do they want to go over the next 5 years or 10 years, or in some cases, maybe it's just 1 or 2 years.
Right.
So that's on the business side. I am a husband and father of 2 kids, two teenage boys. So living the life with having 2 teenage boys. And I will tell you, it gets better and better every day. So that's good. I've had my own business for about the last 11 years. And prior to that, I was an executive in human resources. So I've run all of HR. I spent a lot of my career running leadership and development functions.
Yeah.
Predominantly in technology since about 2000. And then prior to that, I was in financial services.
Right.
Also, the other thing is, you talked about it, and I think it's an important part of who I am, is an ultra distance athlete. So I've done a lot around biking and running. So that between the kind of the executive and the ultra distance is what the book's about, and how do you reach those big peaks.
Brilliant. So maybe let's dig into both of those things, but let's start with maybe the professional side, should we call it, in terms of the things that you've picked up in that career in HR and L&D. Those insights and those things that have stuck with you throughout the years. What are some of the key points that you've experienced in that environment that you still take with you today, either good, bad, or ugly, or indifferent?
Well, there's been a lot that I've learned, in terms, I focus a lot around leading and managing people. And there's often a lot of talk about, okay, is there the optimal way to be a leader? Is there the optimal way to be a manager? And there are things that help somebody be successful. There are kind of common traits that help somebody be successful. But I've seen leaders come from all different backgrounds, all different styles, and it's being able to adjust your style for the right audience. I'm talking to a group next week, and there's 16 people in the room, and they all have very different styles. And part of what I have to do is get them to recognize what's the strength of their style and how they lead, and what do they bring to the table, and then how can they help the team out. So I think the biggest thing that one of the bigger things I've learned is we all bring different things to the table.
Indeed.
And sometimes it's a strength. There's sometimes that, I can be pretty analytical at times, and sometimes that's a strength, but sometimes that's a weakness.
Right.
Depending on what the situation is. So you got to be able to see that situation. You got to be able to know how to adjust. And as a leader, the really good leaders know when to have that analytical hat on, maybe have that sympathetic hat on, maybe that kind of driver hat on. And so being able to adjust. So that's one of the big things I've learned. And the other thing, and this is something I'm constantly working on, is that leaders, kind of people that have moved up, are successful because of the people around them.
Yeah.
And how do you leverage those skills? How do you make sure that those people are treated appropriately and they want to work with you?
Right.
So I think that's just a key element. And I'm always working to do better at that one.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? That people have to remember that the people they're leading are humans, and they have lives around them. They have passions. They have pressures. And it's about understanding those people at an individual level in order to get the best out of them for themselves and their team. Right?
Yeah, and it's funny because there's two people that I can put in my head that have been CEOs, or are CEOs at this point, and one of them was a highly successful CEO, kind of very sought out. The other one is sought out, had two CEO jobs that didn't go as well.
Right.
And I was kind of thinking about the two of them and how are they different. And I think of the one that is highly successful, and what he thinks about, the way I picture him is he cares about the organization and about the people around him. And the other one, why I don't think he's been as successful, is he cares about himself first.
Right.
And it's that, I mean, when you get into, a senior, any type of leadership role, you are there because of the organization and the people around you. You're not there necessarily for yourself. And so as I was thinking about this yesterday, it was fun. I was just having this conversation with someone about how we were comparing these two people. And it's like, yeah, that one person who he's had kind of two failures as a CEO, I think the reason why is he cares about himself first versus this other one. So it's where's your heart go?
Yeah. No, I was reflecting on this recently with somebody, because I spent a few years working with McLaren Formula One team, and they, during my time there, I think the technical term was they were riding the crest of a slump. They were having a terrible time, really falling behind. We didn't even know where the future of the organisation was going to be. And Zach Brown is the new CEO who's come in. He's done some amazing things. But when I listen to him speaking, in those tough times, it's always been about, what I'm trying to do as a leader is this, and I'm trying to help the people. And it's all, when the times are tough, he talks about what he can do. And then more recently, in fact, this weekend, Lando Norris got on the podium somewhere we haven't been in a while. And and all the talk was like, the team have done brilliantly, and the drivers and the team that have brought this together. It's those bits of the language and the subtlety of, as a leader, I'm going to take the pressure and I'm going to give you the kudos when things go right.
I love that. I mean, I love that example. So when is it about you? When's it about the team? And he's the hard times he's taken them on. Yeah. I along those lines, I've watched the Netflix series Formula One.
Yeah.
And it's fast. I'm not a Formula One, I don't have a big interest in that, but it's interesting. What I love watching about it is the strategy behind it. The team, you often think about something like that, or even I'm a cyclist, is cycling it's a one person show. And it's not. I mean, there's one person that crosses the finish line and stands on the podium.
Yeah.
But that's because of 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 people behind him or her. And I think Formula One's a great example. The reason why that driver was standing on the Landon Norris was standing on the podium was because you look at the pit crew. I mean, my gosh, I mean that's an amazing organization to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love that examples.
Yeah. Well, that brings us nicely then to the cycling and the running. And when you say endurance sport or ultra endurance, we're not just talking like a marathon or a couple of marathons here, are we? Tell us a bit more about, firstly, how did you get into cycling and running? And then where have you taken that?
Yeah, so I've always been a cyclist. From the time I was a little kid, I've always loved just getting on a bike and just going. I think every kid who gets their bike for the first time realizes it's freedom. It allows you to go and do things. And then you get to turn 16, at least in the US, and you get your driver's license. Right. But I've always loved that. And I remember my first long distance ride. It was a 200-mile ride. I did it over 4 days. I did it with my parents when I was a young teenager.
Wow.
And rode from the San Francisco Bay Area up to Yosemite National Park. Right. Just beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. And I think from there I got hooked on that ability to go to some place on your own, power.
Right.
And so I've done a number of long distance rides. I cycled across the United States, which is 4,000 miles.
Wow.
And then it continued. I did a lot of one-day events. So 100 miles in a day, 200 miles in a day. I did a 300-miler in one day over about 25 hours. It was the first time I'd gone through the night.
Right.
Where you don't sleep at all during, for the 24 hours or 25 hours. And as I was finishing that, I thought, okay, I've done a lot on the bike. Maybe I should think about something else, because I'm always thinking about what's that goal that I want to focus on.
Right.
And I thought I'm going to set a goal for a marathon, and went out, did the marathon. Then friends and I were talking. It's like, let's do a 50-miler. Did a 50-miler, did a 100-miler. And then we have this run it went around Lake Tahoe. It's 200 miles. So it's 8 marathons virtually back to back.
Right.
And it did that in 76 hours. So with about 90 minutes of sleep. And I love that ability to push yourself,
right,
to understand where those limits, if they exist, and how do you just kind of take yourself a little bit further.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. I mean, so inspiring in its own right. But I know from listening to other shows where you've been talking, and a friend of ours who introduced us, Jens Heitland, his episode goes into a lot of detail on this front. He's a big running and cycling fan himself. But you talk a lot about the preparation. And I love the phrase that I picked up on, which is, if you can get to the start line, you can certainly get to the finish line. Tell us about that, and what you've learned on that front.
When you think about preparing for a 200-mile run, it's not, the run from the start line to the finish line, you have 100 hours to do it.
Right.
So effectively it's 4 days to do that. And you can sleep whenever you want if you decide to sleep, but you have 100 miles from start to finish, 100 hours from start to finish. Now, in order to get to the start line, it may take you a year of preparation. So I had, let's say in November, the prior year, I just finished a 100-mile run. So 24 hours, almost 25 hours. So I was in pretty good physical shape. And so I finished that. I took about a month or two off of serious training. And then kind of January really started to ramp up for the 200-mile run that was going to be in September. So roughly 8 months of training. So in that, if you just look at that 8-month period of training, there's a lot that can go wrong in 8 months.
Yeah.
And you have to stay focused on 8 months, and it's a long time.
Right.
So if you can get to that start line, in the shape that you need to be and not injured, then getting the next 100 hours isn't as bad. Because the hard work is really get you to the start line. And I think about that even in careers. It's like you're trying to get to a certain point. It's a lot of work to get there, and then you get there.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now how do I hold on to it? Yeah. So I've always felt, especially with ultra distance endurance athletes, if you can get to the start line healthy, you've done the hard work. Right. And it's that then you get to enjoy the event.
Nice. Enjoying 200-mile run. But I mean, as you
As much as you could enjoy a 200-mile run, Paul.
fantastic. And what I'm fascinated in is the mindset. You know, it obviously takes a lot of physical preparation there. But what were the difficulties? What are some of the obstacles that you came across in the from the mindset perspective in that 8-month period, for instance? You know, in that
Yeah. I mean,
preparation.
and people often think, oh my, physically I could never do that.
Mm,
You know, there's no doubt physically running a 200-mile run is hard,
mm,
and running a marathon is hard. And what's interesting, I read some statistics that only 1% of the US population, I'm not sure what the UK population is. I'd probably guess it similar numbers,
mm.
but only 1% of the US population has run a marathon.
Right.
And I would say probably 99% could.
Right.
Not 99% may not want to. That's a very different thing.
Yeah.
But the people that come to me and say, "Oh, you know, I could never run it," I think that's in your head.
Mm, right.
If you don't want to do it, then go do something else. But if you want to, you probably could. So mindset, I think, in something like this is far more powerful than in the physical body.
Right.
I've done a number of events. Good friend of mine who, you know, he and I were doing our first 50 miler together. He was in better physical shape than I am. He could run faster. But he had not run anything over 26 miles, nor had I at the time.
Mm,
I had done a lot more longer distance stuff
right.
on the bike. And so I knew the mindset, and I thought, you know, mindset wise, I could probably handle it. And when we predict, I was kind of predicting who's going to finish first, and I predicted he would finish an hour ahead of me. And he ended up finishing 2 hours behind me. And it was probably the mind that got to him.
Right.
That's where one of my strengths is, that ability to, when things are just going really bad, that ability to, okay, what do I need to do to get through this?
Right.
I remember, and I'll give you one of the lessons. I remember one of the things I had to do to train for the 200-mile run is I had to do 4 long distance runs in a row. So I did 4 30-mile runs in a row. So Sunday would do 30, Monday 30, Tuesday 30, and then Wednesday 30 miles.
Right.
And I remember on the third day, I was about 10 miles into the run. So I'd already run 70 miles in the last like 2.5 days.
Wow. Yeah.
And my legs, it was hot because it was August in California. I was tired. I just wanted to stop. And I thought, you know, what I'm going through is hard. There's no doubt about it. I could, you know, in 15 minutes, I could be home sitting on the couch. And I thought about, kind of put things in perspective.
Right.
And I thought about what a friend of mine was going through. She was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Wow.
And what I was going through was voluntary. And the pain could be over in a very short amount of time. What she was going through wasn't voluntary, and the pain wasn't going to be over anytime soon. And so it started to put things in perspective. It's like, if she can make it through that situation that's far worse than what I'm going through,
yeah,
I can definitely persevere. So maybe I'll just walk for a little bit, and then I'll get back and go run in it. And I did that. And as I was relaying this story to her, about a year after that situation, she said, you know, it's funny, Bryan, because I was doing the same thing, because I had a friend that was going through something much worse than I was going through.
Right.
So there's always somebody going through something much worse. There's always something, you know, and I'm not saying that, you know, those situations, you know, we diminish what the pain we're experiencing, but it makes me realize that, okay, I can probably deal with more pain because I know others have.
Right.
So how do you put things in perspective is something I use a lot. And then when you're running 200 miles and you've got 100 hours to do it, you know, you don't want to stop it because it's like, or you don't want to quit, but you could just let me just stop and rest for a little bit.
Right.
Because I've got the time, and then I can continue on. So those are a couple of things I use a fair amount of.
Oh, I mean, wonderful. And I love that reframing or perspective change. And that even the little subtleties there of, you don't have to, you know, you can stop and rest, or you can just slow down a bit and walk for a little while, and then get yourself right, and then move on. I think
Yeah.
there's so many opportunities to use that in business. Speaking to a lot of leaders who are going through something, it's like everything's hectic at the moment. I'm running. Well, slow down a little bit. Keep things floating. Don't drop all of the balls that you're trying to juggle. Pick the critical ones. Keep things going. Get yourself some perspective. Get some coaching, and then move forward and push on again to the next thing.
Yeah, and Paul, and ask yourself, what is it I need today, right now, to make things a little bit better?
Mm.
And I'll give you an example. 3 years ago, so many of us moved from an office into our home.
Yeah.
And at the office, we may had these great chairs. We had, ergonomically they were perfect. Our monitors were in the right location. Everything was set up because the ergonomic group did that. And at home, it wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And so now we're working on maybe a smaller screen, a fold up chair. And so I was talking to somebody going through this. I said, what is it that could make, and they were really having a tough time because, the kids were home, everything was going bad, and their neck was sore. And it's like, what could make it better today?
Mm.
And they said, well, if my monitor was like 4 inches higher because I'm looking down like this and it's hurting my neck. It's like, put a book under it. Figure out what you need right now.
Yeah.
Fix that small thing. Because small things, if you can fix the small things, they don't become big things. Because small things are easy to fix.
Mm.
They're hard to see. Big things are hard to fix, but they're easy to see. And like, let's get those small things fixed before they become big things.
Ah, what a story! Great lesson in that in its own right. Well, so I think we've covered a bit there about that ties into the who do you help and how do you help them. You talk about those lessons from endurance. You bring a huge amount of experience from that world of HR leadership and L&D. So who do you work with these days, and what do you help people to do?
Yeah. So most of the time I'm working with mid-sized corporations. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, so a lot of my clients are in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I have some larger clients that are all over the world as well. Mm. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of the two things that I'm focusing on, working with those directors or vice presidents who are right. leaders, and they want to get a little bit of more awareness of who they are, how they mm-hmm. come across as a leader. So whether that's doing a 360 evaluation or doing some level of assessment, and then helping them understand, it's like, here, Paul, here's what your strengths are. Mm. And here's some strengths that if they're overused, they could become derailers or weaknesses. Yeah. And here's how you may come across to certain people. So you can understand that perception. And a lot of times, I remember I was working with a CFO of an organization, and his perception was he was good with numbers, but he wasn't as good as he thought he was. Right. And he's the CFO of the company. Hmm. And so I asked the people around him, his peers, his direct reports, and his boss, what's his level of accounting? It's like he's one of the best. Right. And so we often operate based on what we think. And I was trying to get this guy to realize, it's like, no, people think you are the best. So you probably aren't operating or influencing at the level you need to. So it's working with people like that to understand their perception, right. how they come across. And then again, it's working with teams. I like to work with teams who are trying to stretch themselves further. Right. It's how are you pushing, this team, maybe you think you can accomplish up to this level. Maybe what if we went a little bit higher? Mm-hmm. How do we push a little bit higher? So those are kind of the people that in organizations I tend to help.
Brilliant. And so let's flip it on its head a little bit and say, how do you get help with your own performance? Who do you go to? What do you do that keeps you performing at your best?
Yeah. There are a couple of people on the professional side that I really respect their opinion. So you kind of break my life down into a couple different areas. There's the work side, the professional side. There's the parent right. side, yeah. And then there's the athlete side. And so I have different people in each bucket. I mean, I have two boys that that are teenagers, and so I have some friends that I respect as parents. that have kids that are a little bit older.
Right.
And so I'll call them up, or my wife will call them up, and it's like, let's get feedback from them.
Right.
So it's having those people that you really respect.
Mm.
There's a couple people on the professional side that I can think of that think very differently than I do.
Mm.
And I like to get their perspective because they think in ways that I don't normally do. And so it gets me thinking, it's like, okay, yeah, that's probably a better way to handle the situation. I realized a while back, and it's an exercise I do with folks, is write down a list of all your mentors. And then let's start to look at the diversity level of those people, diversity in education, in ethnicity, and maybe in religion, maybe in politics, in terms of career, just look at the diversity. And I found that a lot of mine were kind of fairly narrow in their level of diversity. And so now it's like I'm stretching out because I can get a different perspective. And so that's kind of what I like to get. And those are the people I rely on. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and just to stay up on things and what's going on is another way that I kind of try to stay up to speed. But there's a couple people I really rely on, and we'll pick their brain.
I think it's such an interesting lesson for people who are thinking about getting a mentor or some advice. I think with just that thing you picked up on with the parents is, if you can pick somebody who's only a little bit further ahead, they've been through where you are right now, and they can look back on it with some level of perspective.
Yeah.
So it's like, yep, yeah, I know it's going to feel hard. That's going to be a real tough period, but there is an end to it. It might not be, it might be another problem or something else that goes on. But, this is what tended to work in my situation, or this is what I would maybe advise for you going forward. So, yeah, a wonderful lesson in its own right.
Yeah.
And I just realised that one thing I did want to pick up on in terms of the helping people perform side. I just want to go back to the book, Epic Performance. Tell us a bit about the book. And I know I'm a lover of an acronym.
Yeah.
And I think if the acronym fits in with the story that you're trying to tell, even better. So Epic, I love it. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so the title of the book is Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And I went out and I interviewed 100 people, mostly at the C level, so CEO, CIO, CFO, kind of the top of their game, to understand what they did and what they do to kind of get to that level. And then a bunch of ultra distance athletes, people that have done a minimum of the equivalent of like an Ironman.
Right.
Or some ultra distance run or swim or bike ride. I talked to 2 people who did 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents.
Wow.
And so these are big things. And I think there was, my hunch was there was a lot of similarities between people that achieve big things in life and in sport. And I ended up finding that out. So what Epic Performance, that's 5 behaviors, kind of 5 pillars that make this up. The E in Epic stands for, how do you envision the big things in life that you want to accomplish? So you got to be able to see the future in order to go to the future.
Right.
And so that's the E. The P is, how do you put a plan in place to get there? You don't just, see, I want to be CEO and then just kind of go.
Yeah.
It's, some people do, but most people are, it's like they have a focus in a direction. It's like, this is how I want to get to where I'm going. The I is, how do you iterate to that plan? You don't start off running a marathon. You start off running a 5K, a 10K, you work your way up. Right. You figure out the kinks, and then you get it. You kind of improve your way up. The C is, how do you collaborate with others? You had mentioned it. There's somebody that got you into podcasting, and I'm sure you probably talked to him a lot about what was involved.
Yeah.
How do you collaborate with others, people that have gone before you and been successful or even failed?
Yes.
And learn from those people. And then lastly, the performance part is, you're standing at the start line and now you got to go do it. So how do you just go out and perform what you wanted to perform? So that's what Epic Performance is all about.
Wonderful. And I know the book's available on Amazon, and we'll make sure that the links are in the show notes, and I really encourage people to go and check that out and take a look at it and take some lessons from it. Because I love a good framework, because for me, a framework is something that says, I don't know where to start, but I've got some steps here that if I start at step one, there is an end result to this. And I might not get there, but I can work my way through this in order to get towards that goal.
Yeah, and Paul, I like what you said there, because I don't know where to start is often a big thing. And so what I tried to do is put a very practical guide on how do you get started. I mean, one of the things, people say, I've had a number of people come up, it's like, couldn't even run a marathon. And alas, do you want to run a marathon? Or I'm afraid to start my own business. Well, do you want to start your own business? And if the answer is yes, it's like, okay, do one thing in the next 72 hours that moves you forward.
Right.
So I have, under the plan section, I have get started as that first chapter under there.
Yeah.
And then the next one is kind of put a plan in place.
Right. Okay.
So it's like, just get started and do something that moves you forward.
Yeah.
And get the ball rolling. You don't, if you wait until the full plan's in place, you're not going to get done, but just get moving.
Yeah.
And then, I remember having a conversation with a woman about who she wanted to start her own business. And I said, just do something in the next 72 hours. Whatever, start writing your business plan, go out and get a domain name, but just do one thing.
Right.
And then when that's done, do one more thing.
Right.
And it just kind of get that ball rolling.
Oh, wonderful lesson in its own right. There's some absolute gems in this, so I'm loving it all. Let's move on to a slightly different question now, in terms of, in an ideal world, if you could help any individual or team or organization with the skill set you've got and the lessons that you've got and the history you've got, who would you want that to be and why?
I do a lot with corporations and get paid fairly well to do that, and there's a reward there. But where I see most of the reward is when I do work with nonprofits or people that maybe can't afford my services. Right. My dad was a foster kid, which, he grew up without parents.
Right.
And for part of his life, he lived on the streets. And so he did not have all the privileges that I had, nor that my kids have.
Right.
And so when I can work with somebody that is in that situation, and they don't pay me a thing, I often find tremendous reward there. I teach at a university nearby, and there's a lot of the kids that have had a pretty rough environment growing up. So many of them, it's the first time going to college. And, they've gone on to college. Now I'm teaching at the master's. I'm teaching at the graduate level.
Right.
And there's some kids, I hear their story, and I will spend an inordinate amount of time with them after class to help them get what they want in order, because I get tremendous amount of fulfillment of seeing them succeed.
Yeah.
So I mean, those are the people where I get the most value, per se. I don't get any money, but that's not what's important. And I always kind of look at it. It's like the corporations, they're going to pay, they're going to pay the full rate, or, most of the rate. But that gives me time and ability to work with some of the folks that just don't have access to these level of services.
That's a wonderful thing in its own right. And I think the one thing that's coming to my mind is that the value for the corporations is intrinsically linked to a monetary value in terms of why they're doing it. And so it makes sense for them to be paying and financing that piece. But I love that piece for the people who the value is just a change in life or a change in perspective that allows them to lift their head above water or to go on to things that they never thought were possible. Then, I mean, I've been lucky enough to have one or two conversations like that in my time, and it's rewarding beyond belief, isn't it? So.
It tremendously is. I'm fortunate where I can choose a fair amount of my time and work towards organizations like that. I've done a lot for my kids' schools.
Right.
and I get more reward. I feel better about it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so that's we don't all have that ability, that not ability, but don't have that flexibility, I should say. I do, and I'm going to take advantage of it.
Brilliant. And so, flipping that on its head a little bit, if you got the opportunity to sit down and have a meal, have a drink, have a coffee with somebody, primarily to up your game and to learn from them and to up your performance in some way, who would you want that to be?
You know, when I first heard this question, like, God, there's so many people I'd love to have lunch with or dinner with. You know, two people that come to mind, and I'd want to have dinner with them at the same time. Okay. And I'm sure you've heard of both of these because they're both U.S. presidents.
Right.
I'd love to have dinner with Barack Obama and George Bush. Two very different presidents. Yeah. At times, it's like I agreed with what they were doing. At times, I disagreed with what they were doing. But what I have liked that they have done is they both kind of come together on some common ground to help out bigger causes. And I would love to understand, just from a leadership perspective, forget the politics and where they stand on certain things. It's like, how did they navigate through those difficult waters where 50% of the population loves them and 50% hates them,
right?
Yeah. And they still have to move things forward. And then the fact that they've now, where they disagreed on some things very heavily, now they can work together. So I'd love to be able to learn from them, because and how do they do that better? Because that's an area that I would love to be able to do better. It's like being able to hear someone else's perspective, even though I vehemently disagree with it,
right,
and try to understand it a little bit more and take out the emotion of it. So those would be two people that I think would be fascinating to sit down and eat dinner with. Amazing. There's a whole bunch of other people that I could come up with.
I'm sure there are. And finally, then, Bryan, how do people get in touch and find out more? Where do they find out about the book and your services and connect with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest way, well, a couple ways they can get. One of the easiest ways is if you go to epicperformances.com, and that's EPIC, performances with an S, because the book is Epic Performance. So epicperformances.com, that'll take you into my website, take you to where the book is, and kind of links to where you can buy it. It'll also take you to where my services are. The other thing is connect up on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Bryan Gillette, and it's Bryan, Gillette. What I love to hear, Paul, is I love, when people either hear the podcast and then they have some goal and they send it to me.
Right.
And chances are I'm going to respond pretty quickly, because I love to hear those goals. It gets me excited.
Right.
To hear what people are doing. So send me your goals and connect up with me on LinkedIn.
Oh, wonderful. And we'll make sure, as always, that those links are in the show notes, so everyone can just look down below and click on those and go straight to Bryan. I do encourage, like I say with all of my guests, do reach out, get in touch. Everybody's out there. They want to connect, and we want to hear your stories, so do share as well. So, I mean, so many amazing stories, Bryan, and such inspiration in terms of what you've achieved, but almost more from my side is like how you've achieved it and how you've gone about preparing to achieve for those things, and then are now helping others to do that for themselves. So I applaud you for that, and keep up the great work. It's been a pleasure having you on the show today, Bryan.
Paul, it was a pleasure being on your podcast, and I appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best, and can't wait to hear what big things you're up to next.
Brilliant. I'll make a note to send through some goals to you.
Great.
Cheers, Bryan. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.